Hi, everyone. Today, let's talk about Southwest Airlines. Then we'll get right into the charts, and then we'll finish up with my results for the day and positions going into tomorrow. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. Starting off with Southwest here, they've been struggling with getting their flights off the ground. They mentioned here they're operating on a reduced schedule for now, and the stock is moving down. Went down over 5% today. Of course, most stocks are going down today, so that didn't help things, but 5% is definitely more than the market. And this is the second day where the shares fell, where it lost 2.2% yesterday, so pretty significant, down almost 10% in 2 days, when this traditionally has been a fairly sturdy stock. This doesn't have a huge effect on the market, but I did think it was interesting. From what I can find, basically Southwest is having issues getting their planes and their crews in the same location due to some dated software and dated techniques for bringing these two things together. Moving over to the charts, starting with the S&P 500, you can see we had another day of selling here. It wasn't so bad yesterday on the S&Ps. It was a small down move, but today was a more significant down move, more than 1%. We finished the day yesterday at 381.42. We did come up and test that level that we talked about, and then moved all the way down to support just above 376.50. And you can see we had those levels of support on the charts previously. Jumping out to the 1 hour view, you can see we came right into that zone, broke through the resistance that we had at this level previously from this slower decline, and then we came into that support level. I would assume that we're going to get at least a small bounce here, similar to what we had here. On Thursday, the 22nd of December, we came into this level, bounced really significantly. Now we're coming into this zone one more time. It could certainly push through this really dramatically, which is usually what happens when you come into stronger levels. And you can see all the EMAs are starting to roll over in the same vicinity here. That's definitely not a good omen for tomorrow. But I still think we'll get at least a short-term bounce off of support here. It is interesting that we stopped right at support. And usually you need to get some kind of retrace if you're going to push through a level that's as strong as this. If we extend this line out, you can see that puts resistance right at about 380. Looking at the 1-day view here, you can see this is a very significant level. Multiple gaps in this zone. Multiple times we've interacted with it. And if this does break here tomorrow, then you have to assume that we're going to move pretty dramatically and probably pretty quickly. The next level after this is somewhere around 369, 370, which would be the lows here from 3 November. Moving over to the NASDAQ, not quite the same story. Yesterday was a much bigger down move on the NASDAQ. And you can see here we had another continuation. So if you're trying to parse this out here, you kind of have one move, consolidation day right before Christmas, a second down move, and a third push down. And that's kind of right on par. The first push is very big. Second push, fairly strong, finished at the lows. Third push, double bottomed here, kind of. And you can see this is the 15-minute chart. The RSI did start to tick up here just slightly at the end of day. And after hours, we did perk up a little bit. So the low of day was right here at 259.82. And here after hours, we're sitting at 260.40. You can see that first bar after hours was really strong, retraced slightly. Now we're just above that on the 15. Seems to me that we might get at least a little bit of a retrace, maybe retest this high at 262.50. That would be a nice level if we came into that zone and tested. Maybe the pre-market low up here at 262.50, 263. If we did come into that zone, I would expect that to fail there, and then we get the continuation down. After this much selling, usually you need some kind of push up to generate a little bit of buying demand so that we can see the big time sellers come in and push the markets down. And for a clear example of that, that's exactly what we got here yesterday. So you had a little bit of a dip, came up, tested resistance right at this midday high here from Tuesday, failed right at that level, and then sold off throughout the day until we had that bottom today, rallied slightly, tested the 21, and then we had the low of day here. Moving over to the Dow on the daily chart, not even the Dow was safe here today. It sold off throughout the day, closed right at the lows, just like everything else. And if it's going to hold, it needs to hold now. So we have the 55 EMA sitting at 327.81 today, and that should tick up here slightly, maybe 282.50, somewhere in that zone. And if we get below the 55 EMA on the daily chart, that means, in my opinion, we're going to continue lower here. Definitely does not look good on the RSI here. We've come into the 50 line multiple times and failed. Couldn't quite get to the 50 line yesterday and failed once again here today. Certainly possible that we could bounce here off the 55, but it does not look strong right now. Moving over to Apple. This is the biggest stock in the world. I don't talk about it that often, but when you have a big red day like this, right off of the previous day's lows, gapped down and sold off throughout the session, you definitely have to pay attention to that. Certainly a huge move down on Apple, and that's going to drag down all of the markets. Now you can see on the daily chart, we've had all of the EMAs in line since 19 December, but it's worth noting here that we did actually get into some oversold conditions here today for the first time since all the way back here on 30 September. And right at that reading, we did have a bounce for the next 2 days. So we did hit oversold conditions for the first time quite a while here on Apple on the daily chart. And that usually indicates that you're going to get some kind of bounce. Moving over to Tesla, I know I talked about it yesterday and I didn't really want to talk about it again today, but looky here. We got a little bit of a bottoming process. We gapped up, rallied into the morning, and then like the NASDAQ, we sold off for a couple of bars on the 15-minute, but we found a bottom really early, did not even test the lows after hours yesterday, and then rallied through the session. So we ended up closing a little bit higher, closed after hours here at around 313.15 after hitting after hours prices of around 107. That certainly seemed pretty low after the huge move down that we've seen in Tesla, but a little bit of strength here today, which means we could see a little bit of strength across the markets. Maybe Tesla's just kind of leading the way a little bit, dropped more than the others, and then rallied a little bit early. Could be an omen of at least a marginal up day tomorrow. Of course, everything looks pretty negative, but it always looks a little bit negative before you get a little bit of a bounce. So definitely keep in mind that Tesla is 5% of the QQQ. If we get a little bit of a push up in Tesla, that could support the NASDAQ at least a little bit. Moving over to IYT on the 4-hour chart. Not much to say here. It's confirming the down move. Fell throughout the session, closed at the lows. If we do break the low of day from Thursday, the 22nd, that's definitely going to spell lower prices across the market, in my opinion. And if we do break that level, then you start having to look at maybe 207.25, somewhere in this zone. We also have the highs here from 19 October, right at 208.15. Those are some decent levels in here, so not too far until we find some decent support. But the main point is transportation is selling off, and we didn't get to oversold conditions here on the 4-hour like we did a couple of days ago, and you should expect that this is potentially going to move down a little bit more tomorrow. Moving over to consumer discretionary, not much to say here. This is a dumpster fire. It's moved down really significantly from 144.50 all the way down to 126.26, and it's down a little bit more after hours. We're in oversold conditions once again on the daily chart. Does not look good for consumer discretionary, continues to make new lows on the year. And this was extremely high at 210.50 or so in December of 2021. So it's almost been cut in half at this point, and there's no signs of it letting up right now. Moving over to consumer staples, on the contrary, you can see we actually have a little bit of a bullish structure. We're going to be testing that trend line here. We talked about it yesterday that we came up and tested the 144 EMA on the hourly chart. We then retested that pre-market here today and it failed. And as you can see, we sold off throughout the session. So 144 EMA acting as resistance like we talked about yesterday. And as we talked about as well, if consumer staples starts to move down as one of the strongest sectors, then you have to assume that the S&Ps are going to start to move down as well. Also worth noting here that we did get the cross on the hourly chart. So this is bearish momentum, and you have to assume that this is going to continue at least for a while here. And for longer term levels, we're looking at $72 as the next level of support that I would look at. That should act as a really strong level here on XLP. Moving over to XOP. Yesterday, we talked about getting above the 144 EMA. It did look like consolidation above the 144. And then we broke it here in the pre-market. And once that broke, of course, it continued to sell off throughout the session, just like everything else. And at this point, you have kind of a distribution, and you would expect this to continue to the downside. If we do start to see a break of this low here at 103.40, or potentially down here at 129.80, once we see those two levels break on XLP, you should expect that this is going to continue to sell off, probably down to 126 at the next level of support, which would fill both of these gaps here from September and October. Moving over to the put-call ratio. We talked about this for the first time last weekend. A lot of people have been talking about it, and we've been pretty muted here. We did see a pretty decent spike on 23 November, but that sold off pretty quickly, back down into the middle of the pack. But as you can see here recently, throughout December, it's been moving higher. And then today we had a huge spike all the way up to that 2 level. So 2 puts for every call in the markets. And on the daily chart, you can see we haven't seen levels that high going back to 2018. And then the COVID lows, we saw similar levels in March of 20. You can see this general pattern of up move that we've seen basically since the start of 2021. And it continued moving slightly up. And then we got this big peak here. Which generally means that the market is not going to move in that direction. I tend to be a contrarian, and I do think that when you see a bunch of puts in the market, that tends to be a little bit of a bottom, maybe potential for a bounce, which is exactly what we saw here during those COVID levels. It's worth noting here that on 18 March 2020, we did see that put-call ratio get extremely high, all the way up to a 3 level, which we haven't seen really going back all the way to 2017. Throw this onto the 1 week view, you can see we did get into this level a couple of times at that 2 level, but not a lot. You can see just a couple of wicks here. It's also worth noting on this candle that we stayed pretty high. We're at 1.947, just under that 2 level. And this is really exaggerated. So you have to assume that the markets are not going to want to pay out on these puts and that we might actually see a little bit of a bounce going into tomorrow or the next day. Moving over to DXY. You can see after hours yesterday, we kind of sold off, got all the way down to 104, threw a couple of pins through that level and then found some support, got all the way up to resistance at 104.40, and then rallied through that all the way up to 104.50. And it looks like we're going to potentially fail at that level here in the after hours. Definitely going to be paying attention to this after hours today. If we do come back into 104 and we push up tomorrow, potentially pushing back up to this zone that we talked about last video, up at 104.80, potentially all the way up at 104.90, maybe 105. If we do push back into that zone, you have to assume that the markets are going to move down. Still pretty choppy, still in this range. Couldn't quite get above that high from 22 December, but it does look like there's potential that we're going to get through this resistance, come in, back test, and get that continuation. And if that does happen, then you have to assume that stocks are going to move down. Moving over to JNK, not much to say here. Huge red bar, closed right at the lows, all the way down to 88.68. So we filled all these gaps, went right through them. Now we're looking at the next low down here at $88 for support, so another 50 cents lower. Could certainly find support right where we're at. It's not impossible, but you would expect it to come back into these lows after how far it's already pushed. This is definitely a downtrend at this point. And $88 would be my next level that I would be looking for. If that breaks, then you have to assume that everything is going down much faster. That would be taking out the September and November lows. And that's definitely going to be bad for all of growth and the NASDAQ. Moving over to TLT real quick, did gap up to 150 cents and then pushed down throughout the session all the way down to 99.50. And we're right there now, 99.55. You have to assume that we're going to fill this gap if we didn't already. So right down at 99.25. There's also a gap down here at 97.92. So this is definitely breaking down. Momentum is continuing here to the downside. Not oversold yet on the daily chart. So this could continue for sure. So we should expect TLT to continue moving down, in my opinion. Moving over to the VIX, slight up day here today, gap down, then rallied up. Not a lot to say here. I wouldn't expect this to spike up until we get below maybe 255 on the NASDAQ, which we could certainly come in to test tomorrow. I don't think we'll break that tomorrow. That would be a pretty big move, and we've already moved quite a bit. But if we do start to break through those lows on the NASDAQ, you have to assume that everything else is going with it to some degree, and then we would expect the VIX to start spiking higher at that point. Moving over to my accounts, you can see here I made a little bit of money. Up about $500 on the day, which is great considering the NASDAQ was down about 1.5%. And I was bearish on the NASDAQ going into the day, so that all worked out great. I even rolled down some of those calls throughout the session and made a little bit more money. And call me crazy, but I did actually sell just a couple of puts here right in the end of the session, making a small amount of money. And after hours, you can see we're up at 260.30 after closing at 260.10. So really planning to take these off pretty quickly if we see any kind of rally, any kind of profits here. And we start to see that roll over to the downside, I'm going to be taking these puts off extremely fast. Like I said before, if we do break some of those levels, I expect the markets to move down really fast, potentially a watershed style moment. And these puts would definitely hurt me. So I'm just trying to scoop up a couple of dollars here right into the morning. If we do see a sustained bounce, I'll definitely be paying attention to that. And I could leave them on a little longer, but I don't suspect that's going to happen. I'm just trying to play a short-term bounce in the morning. And I'll take these profits extremely fast if I do get any. And if the market does gap down tomorrow, I'll take them off right away. and start to play to the downside. Let me know down in the comment section what you think Southwest is going to do about their issues, and let me know where you think the market is going to go tomorrow. We've seen a lot of days of selling. We haven't seen any real bounces, just some sideways consolidation. And of course, there is not a lot of volume in the markets right now during the holiday season. Can we continue to push through all of these levels without any solid volume? Definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video, and make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. It's all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.